Welcome, welcome, welcome. So grateful for all of you who are joining tonight's second night, part 2 of our Mayoral Candidate Forum. We're so grateful for all of you who are here, and we anticipate an amazing night tonight, like we did have last night. And I am not doing this alone. Once again, I am here tonight with my co-moderator, none other than Dr. Christina Greer. She's a professor of political science and American studies at Fordham University, a frequent commentator for MSNBC, New York 1, WNYC, on and on. She's an amazing, phenomenal, not only academic, but someone who's deeply concerned about New York City politics. And I'm great to have her moderating this forum with me tonight. So let's welcome Dr. Christina Greer.
Hello, good evening, Pastor Mike.
Hey,
and good evening, FCBC family, as I get my computer together. I just want to thank you all so much for tuning in on a Friday night to hear from candidates who are very concerned about our city, and they are dedicating their lives to helping us trying to figure out the future of this city. We know that crime is rising. We've got great concerns about our educational system, climate change, mental health, public health, jobs, how we're going to recover from COVID. Can we have a mayor that actually has a vision to get us on track? And do they understand some of the specific needs of the African-American community in New York City? And I know that Pastor Mike and the community members of FCBC are highly participatory, and you all think about these issues from a host of different angles. And I'm really excited to have Maya Wiley, Andrew Yang, and Catherine Garcia with us here tonight to answer some of our questions and to help us get to know them just a little bit better. I want to remind you all that early voting starts tomorrow. Election day is June 22nd. We want to make sure that you will put it up throughout the night on how to fill out your ballot, who is on your ballot. We know that there's ranked choice voting. You can choose up to 5 different candidates. You heard from 2 last night. You'll hear from 3 tonight, and then there's several others who are also on the ballot. So I want to thank Pastor Mike for inviting me here to help talk about the issues. As you see, it's on your screen. Find my poll site.vote.nyc will help you look at your ballot and also find your poll site, because your poll site, if you decide to early vote, may not be the poll site that you go to if you're voting on Tuesday, June 22nd. So there's some differences in time and there's some differences in location that you want to make sure you check out, because it's not just the mayor on the ballot, it's the controller, the public advocate, city council member, borough president, depending on where you live, possibly some judges, and even some DAs, depending on if you're in Manhattan. So Pastor Mike, thank you again for having me. FCBC, thank you again for having me on this Friday night. And I look forward to hearing from Maya Wiley, Andrew Yang, and Catherine Garcia tonight.
absolutely. I have to say that this is important, not just for our community, but I think for New York City. I think the reason why this forum, the format is so critical, is because we want to make sure that people actually get to hear the issues. And I think what we've seen over the past few debates has been a lot of attacking, a lot of argumentation, arguing, but we haven't heard clear, concise answers to some very critical issues in the city. So we're looking forward to doing that tonight. So without further ado, let's welcome Maya Wiley, Andrew Yang, and Catherine Garcia.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Good evening.
Candidates here tonight.
Thank you all for joining tonight. I have to say this to everyone who is watching, and I want to also say again, thank you all for coming. There were some candidates who were coming and decided not to come, and that's important for us because oftentimes, and you all know that in the faith community often gets drive-by politicking, right? And so for me, to have a forum where candidates get a chance to really engage in the issues that are critical to all New Yorkers, but in particular to the faith community, predominantly African-American, Latino faith community, and that is important. So for me, those who decided not to come, as I said last night, I'll say it again tonight, those who decided not to come, those who are watching, pay attention. Just pay attention, because that says something. But we want to get to know you a little bit tonight. Now, I have to say this. I know you all have done quite a few debates, and but tonight is not a debate. So we want to refrain from a lot of the attacking that could take place. I want to make sure that if candidates say something that another candidate doesn't agree with, we do not cut one another off. I want us to be about the issues tonight, some rich and robust conversation. And so we want to begin tonight.
We all get along, Pastor Mike.
This group is actually pretty good.
You know,
so here's the thing, Pastor Mike, we've already made news in the sense that clearly we've got ranking of 1, 2s, and 3s across the board. So they're all co-endorsing. It's apparent.
There you go.
I'm voting tomorrow, so you gotta make your case.
There you go. Well, thank you. So here's how we're going to begin tonight. I want you all to give about a 90-second intro to yourself, opening statement, so people can get to know you a little bit better. And we'll start with Catherine tonight, and then we'll hear from Maya and Andrew.
So I'm thrilled to be here, and the only person on the screen not to be negative. Dr. Greer, you're keeping up with us, and I'm exhausted. The trail is hard, but you are always one step ahead. So I'm Catherine Garcia. I'm running for mayor because I don't just want the title of mayor. I really want to do the job of mayor. And I know that I can deliver on everything that I promised because I have been delivering for New York for the last 14 years, whether or not that was making sure you had clean drinking water or keeping our harbor clean so you could go to the beach, or plowing snow or picking up garbage. And during the height of the pandemic, putting together a team that has now delivered over 230 million meals to people who are hungry or who are sick. And we did that without any restrictions. You just checked a box that you were impacted by COVID, and we made sure that you had food. And I got my work ethic from my parents, who were a teacher and a labor negotiator, and who were able to have 5 children, 3 of whom were adopted. I was adopted, as well as 2 of my siblings who are Black. So I got to see the diversity and the power of diversity at the dinner table. But I also got to see the way that we were treated differently, whether or not that was walking down the street or walking into a store. And I know that my lived experience impacts how I view the world, and why I know that everyone needs to feel safe in their streets, regardless of the color of their skin, that we all need respect, and we need police to be guardians. But we have to come out of COVID strong. We have to reopen this economy and really support our small businesses and our entrepreneurs, and make it so that people have access to jobs. And I've committed to a jobs program for young people 16 to 25, because it's the right thing to do. It will actually also help fight crime. And we do need to make sure that we're focused on the long term and climate change. I'm passionate about this issue. I have been working at the forefront of it for all of my career, because when you do the right thing for the planet, you actually are doing the right thing for people and making it so we have clean air and clean water. And I'm excited to roll up my sleeves and get it done, because that's what we all deserve, is a mayor who is going to put us first, do the hard work, and deliver.
Thank you, Catherine. Mine.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm the daughter of civil rights activists. I know what it feels like to go to a segregated, overcrowded, underfunded elementary school. And I know what it's like to be in a neighborhood that gets gentrified. Those were my childhood experiences. But it was also my parents' activism that led me to go to law school, to become a civil rights lawyer who worked on every issue, from the ACLU to the NAACP to founding my own not-for-profit. But it was every issue because we don't live single issue lives. And it's the reason my organization that I founded, the Center for Social Inclusion, focused on dismantling structural racism. But I'm proud and privileged to have gotten the opportunity to work both on government for years as a civil rights lawyer and activist, but also in government, inside City Hall, on everything from increasing women and minority-owned business enterprise contracts from $500 million to $1.6 billion, to suing Verizon because it wasn't delivering as it said it would. First time we ever sued a major telecommunication firm. But, you know, more importantly, getting free broadband to every single apartment in Queensbridge houses. So showing government how to be bigger, bolder, and more transformational. But that's part of what called me into the race, a race I never thought I'd run in. I never thought I'd run for public office. But in this time of crisis. We have to do more than recover. We can't just go back to January 2020. We must make sure that we are a city where all our people can have thriving, bright futures, where we don't lose a generation, and where we can afford the rent and be safe from crime and safe from police violence. And that's why I am here. So it's a pleasure to be with you to talk specifically about how to do that.
Thank you, Maya. Andrew?
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Thank you, Dr. Greer. It's great to be here with you today. And congratulations on the phenomenal growth of the FCBC. It's awesome. I know it's been a really difficult time for a lot of people in Harlem and around the city, but I know you've been a source of strength and uplift. I'm going to share a couple of experiences I had in Harlem. One, when I visited East Harlem just a couple of weeks ago, and then the other was secondhand. But when I visited East Harlem, I was shown around the neighborhood by a group of activists, and there were 4 methadone clinics on one block. And it has changed the nature of that neighborhood. Another set of blocks was overrun by people who are now in homeless shelters. And the woman who was taking me around, this community leader, said that she'd had to clean human waste off of her doorstep that morning. And Harlem, as a neighborhood, I know has gotten has gotten gentrified in some measure over the last number of years. But then the character seems to have changed markedly over the last 1 to 2 years in the manner that I'm describing. I'm sure it's not the entire neighborhood. It could just be this handful of blocks in East Harlem. But this is not right. This should not be happening to your neighborhood. And it's a result of the fact that the city has been putting certain types of structures and facilities in places that are politically weaker. They just think like, hey, no one's going to be as upset about it if we put it here. And then it ends up changing the character of a neighborhood that has been a wonderful place and continues to be a wonderful place. But people are having negative experiences now. And then the community activist brought me to a bus stop where apparently she said that like dozens of people are getting dropped off every day for the shelters. The second experience was from a staffer of mine who was living in Harlem, and there was a shooting outside of his window. And like there were cops that came. There was like a shell casing on the ground. His girlfriend was like petrified for his well-being and the rest of it. The fact that this was just happening steps from a random apartment in Harlem was very, very concerning to obviously like all of us. But I know that people in Harlem are having these experiences too. That streets that were previously safe, subways that you were confident in, now people are not as confident in. And so these are the core problems that, to me, the next mayor has to address for you and yours, for every community in New York City. That there are people that are suffering from mental illness and substance abuse, and they need help, but we can deliver that help in a way that does not change the character of neighborhoods. And there's too much crime, there's too much insecurity. We have to address things that are making us and our families not feel safe in our own city. And I will deliver on these 2 things and more as your mayor.
Good, thank you, Andrew. I'm glad that you mentioned this about the crime, and you said in Harlem, FCBC is located at 116th and 7th. A few weeks ago, I came to the church, and there were police officers on 116th Street, and they said that there was a shootout the evening before. And the reason they were there, and as I talked to them and turned, there were bullet holes on the side door entrances to the church. And in fact, there was still a bullet lodged in one of the doors, and that's why they were waiting for the crime scene to come. So for the community, for our community and the community of Harlem, crime is an issue. Crime is up. We know they set up 77% between January and May. And at the same time, we've seen that gun arrests have been down. So we want to talk about public safety to begin with tonight. So I want to begin with Maya. I want to hear about your strategy to decrease crime, but I also want you to speak to the fact that you've talked about decreasing the NYPD budget by $1 billion. So the idea of how do we increase safety while decreasing the NYPD budget?
Thank you. I'll be very concrete with 3 buckets. I mean, one, We have the largest police force, not just in the country, it's the size of many armies. And frankly, the issue isn't whether we need more police officers, it's how we deploy our policing resources smartly. I'll just give you one quick story that just happened today, in fact, to a friend of the family who had a fight with a roommate. Neighbor called the police. The police, hours later, the police show up, knock on the door, try to knock it down. Someone had claimed that she was suicidal. She answered the door. She said, "I'm not. We had a fight. I'm fine. I have a therapist. All's good." They told her that they were going to take her to the hospital unless she agreed. And if she didn't agree to go, they were going to put her in handcuffs and arrest her. There were 3 squad cars. 4 police physically escorted her to a hospital. It was a use of police resources that had 0 to do with safety, 0 to do with any knowledge of mental health or crisis intervention, and it was a waste of resources and had nothing to do with public safety. So first, we have to recognize we got to focus police on the crimes that need focus in the places they need it, but do it smartly, like getting out of patrol cars, assigning cops appropriately, and having the right partnerships also with the federal government. But secondly, we have to make and understand so many of the calls that go to the police department are not for public safety issues. This is the point. As many as I was literally looking at the data, I won't talk about that data, but by some numbers, as many as 40% of the calls that go to the NYPD through 911 are not for crimes. They're literally for mental health distress calls. But we don't have the resources invested in mental health crisis response and having the right responders. And so what we're really talking about is shifting our resources so that we have the right balance, the balance between how we're using our police resources, but also so that we're recognizing what calls we're getting and getting the right responses to those calls. And that's also about creating participatory justice funds that build up the community's ability to have funds. And I'm going to take 18 million of that funding that I'm talking about shifting so that in communities that have high rates of gun violence, the communities also have a participatory budgeting process to direct those dollars to what the community needs. Because if we're really going to have a trauma-informed care model, because so much of violence includes trauma that we're not dealing with, we actually have to call in the community and its expertise to do just that. And we have models that have done it in the city, but whenever I meet with crisis response teams like Life Camp or SOS or any of the others we meet with, I hear the same thing over and over again. We are not, as a city, investing in what communities are asking us to invest in that will keep violence down, prevent the gun from being picked up in the first place. And that's the balanced approach that I'm going to strike.
I want to move on, but I do want to just ask. So I think what you outlined is good. Specifically, what are some strategies you think day one as mayor of New York City you implement to reduce gun violence?
But day one, it's both these things. So first of all, we got to look at the data and track it and follow it in terms of where the gun violence rates are the highest, but how the guns are coming into the community. Because the reality is we have the strongest gun control laws in the country. The issue is getting at how they're coming into the city and onto our streets. And we have had very low rates of actually solving violent crime in communities of color that have had the highest rates. In fact, homicide resolutions are 20% higher in white communities than in communities of color. This is about being smart about finding and tracking the crime and going after it, not just putting more police on a corner after a shooting happens, which is so often what happens. Friend of mine whose nephew was shot and killed at 4:30 in Bed-Stuy in October. The police added more police to that corner after that shooting. And do you know what happened? There were two more shootings on that same block in plain view of those police officers, even though there was more police present on the block. So a big part of it is also having the targeting happen based on the data, but it's also building up the other side of it, building up the community-based partnerships, recognizing the violence interruption models, but also the trauma-informed care models is a lot of what communities are saying are the deep-seated roots of some of these gun being shot in the first place. So it's actually building that up in the community, recognizing violence interruption. I heard it in Far Rockaway. I think, Andrew, you were there too when we heard this from violence. Yeah, but the ask was for social workers to be part of the violence interruption teams. The ask, and so, you know, First Corinthians has mental health services, very unique for faith-based organization. We need to be building these community-based models out because that is day one. That is about preventing day one.
We're going to come back to that mental health piece. Catherine, I'd like you to address this issue of rising crime and gun violence and how you would address it day one as mayor of New York City.
Yes, we are seeing an incredible uptick in gun violence, but also in anti-Asian hate crimes, anti-Semitic crimes, as well as subway crimes. But specifically on gun violence and the shootings that we have seen, you know, my plan is really two parts. The first is I would expand the gun suppression division of the NYPD because they do the real investigative work around these incidents to make it so that they are stopped. Because we know that sometimes these are revenge issues. And goodness gracious, if we didn't have social media, we'd probably have less shootings because we know that that drives some of this. The second is to do gun buybacks and to expand, because any gun we get off the street is a possible life saved. The third piece of it is making sure that we do have neighborhood policing so that people are talking to people in the communities and building trust that they are, quote unquote, off radio. So not responding to 911, but really on the beat so that we can have lines of communications, investing in the Cure Violence movement and Release the Grip, two programs that have shown to be successful, as well as working with our federal partners to stop the iron pipeline, because the guns do almost always come from somewhere else. But I also have said that we need to invest in our young people. And that's why, using some of the federal money that we've received, I would have a guaranteed jobs program for anyone 16 to 24 as a wage subsidy with jobs in the private, nonprofit, and public sector. We have to do all of the above, but we've got to nip it in the bud because I lived through the 70s and 80s. I've had a gun pulled on me. I don't want to do that again. I don't want my children to be faced with that. And to be quite honest, they never develop the strategies of, how to walk, when to walk, taking the subway, not taking the subway. I don't want to do that again. And when I'm mayor, I'm going to make sure that we all stay safe.
Part of your policy about gun violence and dealing with public safety, Catherine, you talk about promoting officers that prioritize community engagement. What does that mean? What does it mean for a police officer to prioritize community engagement?
So it is using your police resources to be talking to community, to be attending events within the community, to be engaging with them. And so how you spend your time and those relationships that you are developing, that counts. You can track that and you can promote off of that. So because it makes the community safer and therefore crime goes down. And this is also where, if there are any acts of not only police brutality, which is the worst, the FAR issues, but it's the day-to-day issues of respect between police and community that are also important to be measuring. And, this is personal to me. As I said, my brother is Black, my children are half Puerto Rican. I need them to be respected and feel that police are guardians for them. And that is the model I intend to create.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. There are, to me, medium-term and short-term approaches to gun violence. Like the medium-term approaches are summer youth employment programs, which I think we should dramatically expand so that any young person who wants a job can have one. I want some of those jobs to be year-round as well. We've underinvested in many communities, but we should face facts on what short-term curbing gun violence will look like, which is going to mean uh, taking taking back various streets and neighborhoods with the help of community leaders. But I would bring back, as Catherine said, we should be shoring up the gun violence suppression division. I would initiate an anti-violence and community safety unit of plainclothes officers that work with community leaders. I would want to use focused deterrence, which is when you go to a community and say, look, who are the people that you're scared of, who's trouble, and then if something is going to happen, then we come to you first. But we're going to have to invest in trying to get guns out of bad people's hands. 2/3 of these shootings are gang related. 25% of the shootings are being solved, which means 3 out of 4 the shooter's still walking around. You'll never get control of gun violence at these rates. And so we have to invest in law enforcement to try and get the clearance rates up and the shootings down, and send a very clear message that if you shoot someone in New York City, we're going to catch you, and you're going to go to jail, and you're not going to shoot anyone else. Unfortunately, right now, 3 out of 4 shooters are still walking around, and so that's not the message that people are getting. It's going to be a lot of work, but I know that the people in your congregation around the city, like, this is what we know we need to do, because if our city ends up spiraling into an environment where people don't feel safe, where we're accepting multiple shootings a day, like by one estimate, 1,000 New Yorkers are going to get shot between now and the end of the year, and that's unacceptable. Like, we can't look at that and say that we're going to tolerate this. Our city will not survive in its current form. It will survive, obviously, because it's New York City. But there are going to be more people that look around and say, this is not where I want to raise my family. We can't allow this to happen.
Just very quickly, one, we gave time for that because public safety is a critical issue. But as we go, I know, Ms. Garcia, you have a hard stop at 7:05. So we want to make sure that our responses are about 2 minutes so we can make sure we get to all the issues we want to cover tonight. Dr. Greer?
Thank you so much. I have some questions about segregation in schools. And so I'd like to start with Garcia, Yang, and then Wiley. And if you all could please keep your answers as tight as possible. And Maya, I saw you sitting on your hands because you want to respond to a previous question, but let's try and keep it to segregation in schools. And feel free to weave in these things for all of you. So Catherine, I'll start with you. New York City is the largest and most segregated public school system in the country. I want to hear from each of you. What is your plan to desegregate our schools, K through 12, and not just specialized schools, all the public schools in New York City? Catherine Garcia.
Yes, and I'll say I would start even earlier with providing childcare for 0 to 3-year-olds, partly because kids need to be ready for school, but also because parents need to be able to go to work. And this has been such a burden on parents. But 4-year-olds should not be tested for gifted and talented. There should be magnet programs in every school across the city, and that there is art and music and sports and theater, partly because we have to educate the whole child. We have to give them the creative options as well as the critical thinking options. I would move to the District 15 model, which in District 15 in Brooklyn, they removed all of the screens from middle school and worked hand in hand with parents to do that. So was not in conflict within community and actually achieved it. Then in high school, I would create more high schools in the outer boroughs and use the GPA and take the top 10% of GPA, very similar to the University of Texas model, which has been shown to increase integration, both racially as well as economically. And we have to even go further and think about how we are pairing children with real opportunity, like early college, where you're graduating from high school with an associate's degree, braided learning, where you have work experiences in high school, and then 10,000 internships for our kids, because it's not only about educating the child, it's making sure that they're ready for a 21st century economy, and that they are ready to thrive. And even for kids who don't want to go to college and want to go to trade schools, that we are intentional about making sure that they have careers. because those are good middle-class jobs when you get into a building trades union or into a civil service union. I like to say that when I was at DEP, the highest blue collar level, which was 4 levels below me, always made more money than I did. So if you're in senior stationary engineer, electric D+, very, very nice opportunities there. But it's really about taking away from the earliest years the screens and making it so that we are equitably funding every single school, and everyone wants to go to their local school over sort of shoveling into scarcity as a model.
Thank you. Andrew, how do you plan to desegregate our schools and work with the limited resources that are oftentimes allocated to them?
I'm a public school parent, and every parent wants to be able to send their kid to a school that's providing an education they're excited about, that reflects the diversity of their community and the city. And we do have a once in a generation opportunity right now in terms of school funding that's come in. I agree with Catherine that we should not actually accept like a scarcity model when it comes to the resources and the types of schools our kids are going to. I would want to open new schools in the outer boroughs. Right now, you have people who are, really bending over backwards because they think that a certain school is, going to deliver the kind of future that their child deserves. We should be investing in schools in every community and give the principals the agency and autonomy to be able to provide for our kids, whether they're special needs, like one of my sons, or whether there's an enrichment program or an accelerated program that should be in the school. Kids should not have to test to another school to have access to an enrichment program or an accelerated program. It should be right there in that school. And if we can deliver on that promise, then you're going to see parents stop right now and like all these contortions and all of this, like, the politicization of what type of school that their child attends. If we can shore up our public school system in a way that's appropriate, and as Catherine said, invest in technical, vocational, and apprenticeship programs so that kids are being connected to opportunities at every stage, then we'd have the kind of diversity of outcome and results that our kids deserve, as opposed to right now, if you're in certain areas and certain schools, then unfortunately you're going to be much worse off than in others. But we do have a big opportunity right now. Like the level of funding we're getting is in the billions, and we have to take advantage of it. We have to make an historic investment in our schools.
Thank you. And Maya, what's your plan to desegregate our schools?
Let me start with one's personal story, because it does frame out what I'm going to do. Because I'm fortunate to have had 2 parents who between them had over 8 years of graduate education, who sent me to kindergarten learning ready. I'd gone to an experimental nursery school. I was reading Bank Street books. My mother was reading those to me before I started kindergarten. And here's the thing. Because my elementary school was segregated and therefore also overcrowded and therefore also underfunded, by 2nd grade, I was at the top of my class and I was 2 grade levels behind. And that had nothing to do with the investments my parents made, either in early childhood or in terms of what they did at home or in terms of what enrichment I had. I want to say this not because those things aren't also important, true, and critical. I just want to say that to say how broken it is that we have the public education system we have in this country as well as in this city. So first, we have to confront the fact that we have many discriminatory admissions practices in our public school system. And if they discriminate, they have to be gone. It is kindergarten. Of course, we shouldn't be testing kindergarten students. That's not enough. Of course, we should eliminate middle school screens. That's not enough. We also have to do all the things, whether it's taking in lateness, whether it's assessments that actually discriminate against the children. We know what they are. I've said that when we co-chaired, I had the privilege of co-chairing the School Diversity Advisory Group. We came up with 200 pages of recommendations, and I'm going to stick with those recommendations when I'm mayor. But one of the things that they said, in addition to eliminating discriminatory practices, and we heard this both from students and parents around this city of color in segregated schools is invest in us. We don't have a community where integration means we have a whole lot of people who are white in our neighborhoods. So what we want actually is also the resource bringing that makes our schools great schools. And that was part of our recommendation. So one, I'm going to hire 2,500 more teachers, because if we don't bring our class sizes down, especially because that's in our communities, it's in Black and brown communities and Asian communities around this city, we don't bring that down, all of the other innovations we're talking about are very hard to do well. So that's going to be to bring class size down, but we're also going to put trauma-informed care in our schools because our kids are traumatized. And as a trauma survivor, I will tell you, trauma does impact educational outcomes. And just like we have high rates of gun violence, that's a trauma. It's also a trauma to be poor. It's a trauma to wonder if you're going to get evicted from your apartment. It's a trauma to be thrown up against the wall by a police officer who thinks you match the description. And so putting trauma-informed care is part of the solution, but also the community-based schools model, where we have actual partnerships with not-for-profit organizations that are supported and coordinated through the school with wraparound services so that the whole family, as well as the whole child, gets the opportunity to do well in school.
So I want to jump in and ask a question about job creation, because I want to respect Catherine's time before she has to leave us. And again, I speak on behalf of Pastor Mike and the entire FCBC family, but we really do appreciate you all spending this Friday night with us answering these questions in such a detailed and substantive way. Catherine, I think we should start with you just in case we go over time. I want to make sure you get to speak to the FCBC community. This is about job creation. For each of you, and we'll go Catherine, Andrew, and then Maya, what is your plan for job creation in the city? How do you plan to jumpstart jobs? And we know that so many of our frontline workers aren't even making a livable wage and aren't able to live off of $15 an hour, if that's even what they make. So what's your specific plan for those people, for MWBs, and how far would you move toward a real living wage, and how would you do that? I know that's a lot to encompass in 120 seconds, but let's try.
Let's try. You know, COVID hit us enormously hard. We were north of 600,000 jobs lost. We're now still north of 500,000 jobs lost. You know, the first thing I want to do is align our economic development and our workforce development together, because we invest in things that create warehouse jobs as a city. That's just stupid. We need to invest in things that actually will have middle-class outcomes when we are doing economic development projects. The second is investing in our small businesses, because they're 50% of our private sector employment, with low interest loans, with getting rid of all of the permitting and having one city permit, so that you don't have to run around and spend your life figuring out government, that government's there to help you and support you, that we are forgiving fines and fees, particularly for this year, that we are opening up the public realm, like open restaurants, which have been so enormously successful, so that people can earn more money, that we, as I said before, are creating a jobs program for our young people and guaranteeing them employment. But we've got to be open for business. But part of being open for business is about public safety, because we need people to go to restaurants and go to work. And if they don't go to work because they don't feel safe, that's a real problem. But making these investments in our economic development is about making investments in our people, because the one thing we know is that it's not just that business, you're going to bring a company here so that they can have jobs. It's not how it works anymore. When you have a livable city where people want to stay, people want to come, people want to visit, that is when business follows the talent. And so having our young people ready for the 21st century economy and doing the workforce development, we know that that brings in business to this city and also fosters our entrepreneurs who want to start businesses. And that is my approach, because affordability is having incomes that you can afford to pay the rent, and also dealing with the affordability as we go forward. And if I end up having to jump, which I might, I want to thank you Pastor Mike and Dr. Greer for having me and my fellow candidates who I get to see more than my own family. And, this is an incredibly important election. Voting starts tomorrow. How we bring all of us together, unify the city as New Yorkers, and make sure that we are all thriving and able to raise our families here is what drives me to do this and why I want to be mayor.
Thank you so much. And we understand that you have to jump. And so that was your closing statement. So if you need to jump off, exactly. We understand, but the FCBC community thanks you for joining us and thanks you for running and doing this public service for the city of New York. Andrew, would you like to answer the question about job creation? So what's your plan for job creation in the city, WMBs? How do we come up with a real living wage for people, and how would you do that as mayor?
Thank you, Dr. Greer. We're missing 500,000 plus jobs, and 300,000 of them are in jobs related to people walking around our streets in our city. So this is restaurants, bars, hotels, tour bus operators, retail, etc. Now, how are we going to get back the 67 million tourists who used to visit our city and the millions of commuters who are not showing up right now? Unfortunately, it does come back to public safety, where right now, if people don't feel safe visiting New York City, then we're not going to get those tourists back. We're not going to get those jobs back. So we do have to start by delivering the basics and make it so that people feel completely at ease commuting in, visiting our city. Now, that's not going to be enough of a process. A lot of neighborhoods are going to be left behind. So I will bank will invest hundreds of millions of dollars. You guys hearing that?
Yeah.
All right. We'll invest hundreds of millions of dollars in minority and women-owned businesses in Black and brown neighborhoods that are going to get overlooked by the corporate giants. Like, if you're a corporate giant, you don't really care about the hair salon in East Harlem that can't reopen its doors, but we care. And I'm passionate about this because I used to run a small business here in New York, and anytime I see a small business go dark, I think about that family that put years and years of blood, sweat, and tears into making that business work, all the people they employed, all the people that enjoyed that service. We have to give every small business owner a real chance to make it through this time and reopen their doors, particularly because if that storefront goes dark, how long will it be until a new business decides to occupy that space? And if no new business does come, then we're talking about darkened storefront, and then you're not safe, and then it can lead to blighted neighborhoods. So this is how we should be investing the federal relief money, just trying to get doors open around the city in neighborhoods that aren't going to recover by themselves. And unfortunately, it's a significant number of neighborhoods. Now, Dr. Greer, when you're talking about people not having enough to get by, I ran for president on an anti-poverty platform, and I want to do everything I can to address poverty in New York City in ways both direct and more imaginative. So direct, I've put forward $1 billion in direct cash relief to people who are struggling in extreme poverty, some of which are making lower than the $15 that you're suggesting. I want to get people bank accounts who don't have it right now. They're getting exploited by check cashing fees and remittance fees and pawn shop lenders in some cases. I want to get people internet. I want to get people out of these food deserts and transit deserts. Like, I want to attack poverty on every level, invest in schools, obviously. I mean, that's going to be a path out. So there are ways that we can get more purchasing power into people's hands, more well-being into people's hands. But the jobs, it's going to be at least a two-pronged approach, which is direct investment in small businesses and trying to get our city back on its feet again.
Thank you. And sorry, I had to mute. I live in Brooklyn, so this is the city. Maya, what is your plan for job creation specifically, and how would you help people really have a substantive living wage or more?
Well, look, let's start by recognizing New York is going to recover, including economically, from COVID. It is. It already has started. The question is, how do we recover all of our communities, all of our people? Because in every single crisis, what happens is the city recovers, but the same communities like Harlem, like Southeast Queens, Corona, like East New York, like the North Shore of Staten Island, are always the same ones who do not completely recover. So first and foremost, I'm doubling the size of the capital construction budget. We're going to spend $10 billion over 5 years, which will not only help us build things we need built, like more permanently affordable housing, and fix things we need fixed, like public housing, but it is going to be 100,000 jobs. We'll create 30,000 will be direct jobs. They'll be good jobs. They'll be union jobs, but we will also have local targeted hiring. This city has never really done that aggressively. We will have them along the lines of the Los Angeles model, which has shown that this is doable. But we will do that in a way that targets the hiring so that we're also hiring from communities that have been hit hardest by this crisis and frankly had double the unemployment rates even before COVID. Let's be honest, particularly in Black and brown communities. So that's number one. But the 70,000 additional jobs are indirect. Those are jobs that we're creating by how we're purchasing. We're going to have women and minority-owned business enterprise, not just goals, but I'm hiring a New Deal New York czar who is going to be a direct report to me as mayor, because what I learned in City Hall working on MWBE when I came in, got a title with no budget, no staff, frankly, no programs. I had to try to build the plane and fly it, is that you did need someone. And I got the spend up from 500 million to 1.6 billion in 1 year. But it was because I was a direct report to the mayor and I could just use the bully pulpit. So we're going to have that in New Deal New York to make sure the local targeted hiring is happening and the women and minority business enterprise contracting. But we're also small businesses are half of our jobs in this city. And this is an opportunity both with New Deal New York and with my $30 million in grants. We're going to focus on clearing out back debt, grants, not loans, for small businesses in hard hit zip codes that have 10 employees or less. And frankly, these are the businesses that did not get either the city program funds, which were gone within a week, or the federal payroll protection program dollars. And the reason was there was no set aside for the businesses that frankly are our mom and pop shops, owned by people serving and creating more jobs in the community. We're going to actually target these funds and these programs for those businesses. And thirdly, universal care, creating universal care centers, which are also community-based jobs in care, and they will be union jobs.
Good.
Great, thank you. That's right.
We have a couple of questions we want to get to, so please, as Dr. Gray said, we want to tighten the answers because I want to get it to as many critical questions. One is, all of you in some way, shape, or form have talked about the need for mental health services, whether it is embedding mental health professionals with the NYPD. But we know that in many African American communities, Latino communities, communities of color, we live in traumatized communities where we have seen the normalization of trauma. And although many have talked about increased mental health services, what would you do as mayor to make sure that we have access? Because part of the challenge is that many people in these communities don't have the financial resources to get mental health services. So what would you propose to do creatively to ensure increased access to mental health services to address these issues, which all of you have said in some way, shape, or form have root causes in mental health issues? I want to start with Andrew.
Well, the place we should start is in our schools, particularly as kids return in the fall. Many of them will be suffering from trauma, neglect, or even abuse. And obviously that's going to be cost free. I mean, you have counselors in schools, it's not like the family's getting charged for that. I'm going to suggest too, that one of the things I've seen consistently that makes people happier, mentally healthier, more resilient is faith and the communities that you all represent. Like, I think our city should become a better partner to faith-based organizations, affiliated nonprofits. I don't think government has all the answers or all the energy, and we should be amplifying and augmenting the level of resources available to the people who are doing good work. Because when I go to a church service, I haven't been to FCBC. When I go to a church service, I see people who are being made whole and healthy and resilient through their faith, and I think to myself, wow, anything we can do to help. And they're not yours. I mean, your congregation is thriving, but there are many communities that are suffering financially right now. I do think having these services funded is a wise public investment. Where it goes back to public safety, unfortunately, but there are many mentally ill people walking the streets right now. And we need to get them into better, more supportive environments that will make them healthy. It's going to require massive investment. It's going to require moving people from one place to another in significant numbers. So this, to me, is a central task, getting people to be strong and healthy on multiple levels. But we're going to put billions of dollars behind this, in my view. Like, the city's badly wounded. We're suffering from like a spiritual crisis, depression. We're turning on each other. Like, the whole thing is awful. And, you know, like the next mayor has to be someone who can help lead us out and will invest appropriately.
Thank you, Maya.
I'm trying to be brief because I know we have many questions to get to. So I'm creating universal care centers for childcare, elder care, or family members with disabilities as drop-off centers for care in communities, starting with our hard-hit communities. But those centers, in addition to care, is going to be where we're going to co-locate not just our community-based partnerships, because we're going to increase funding for services in communities, starting in communities of color hard hit by COVID, making sure that we're doing more to support community-based services on the ground. That does mean our human service contracts. It does mean getting also more resources to small organizations in communities that are doing the work, but also have these universal care centers as places that start to become places where people can not just drop off family members for care, but also get services and support. So that's one of the places we're going to co-locate services and supports, including the community-based supports that we're helping to resource with more dollars. It's part of what I'm going to do with the money I'm shifting from the New York City Police Department in shifting and creating more balance in investments on the ground. Trauma-informed care in the schools is part of it. That means hiring and making sure we're hiring social workers for every single school. But we're talking explicitly, and in my plan for putting cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, I'm being explicit because we know the therapies that actually work to help kids with their trauma. But we're going to actually make those services available directly in the schools and increase the number of school psychologists. But that community-based model I talked about earlier of community-based schools, which is building up the community-based organizations that can provide the support services and having those wraparound services with our students and their families, not only the students, because oftentimes that trauma can also sometimes originate in the home and also result in domestic violence and other unfortunate things that we're seeing grow rapidly in this city, which is its own public health issue. And we're going to also create the flying squads for mental health crisis response and more locations to take people that are not jails, not prisons, but that create a pipeline to other services and supports like supportive housing for those who need housing.
Thank you. Andrew, you mentioned something. I want to pose this question and hopefully we can answer quickly and give you all some time. But you talked about tapping into the faith community. One of the things we forget in New York City is that there are over 6,000 houses of worship in New York City. Also 1,000 synagogues, over 100 mosques. These are institutions that are doing the work on the ground, feeding, like FCBC having a mental health facility, creating opportunities and programs, right? But what happens in government is that oftentimes clergy, faith-based institutions are used for optics, to show up for the photo op, to be validators for programs, but are not brought to the table. How will you creatively and really imaginatively really use the faith community as really those who are on the ground to really partner in substantive ways? Maya?
Oh, wait,
So,
I'm sorry, that's not for me? No, it wasn't.
No, we're going to Maya. They'll come in there.
okay. Well, thank you.
And tight 60 seconds because you all have to leave.
So creating a real clergy council that's a policy council, because I've already done this in my campaign with people's assemblies, but that council means policy proposals are brought to the clergy council for feedback, but also the clergy council is asked to generate as well, because I think often what happens in government is we don't always know. how we should be partnering with the clergy community and interfaith. I just found out that Sikh houses of worship actually do food service available that they're taking actually outside of the house of worship into other communities. So we also have to support those collaborations between faith-based communities and leaders and institutions. But the second is a portal where we're actually making it a one-stop shop for all of the both grants and service opportunities that government has, so that it's easier to find the opportunities to partner. And third, when I'm talking about the community-based models of support, it includes the not-for-profits and all the community-based work that our faith-based leaders are doing, so that we're going to be creating those partnerships around what those services and supports are, so we can more directly find those partnerships that we can build over time.
Thank you, Mike.
Pastor Mike, I just want to say, instead of having the clergy validate something the government's doing, the government should just be supporting you all. I ran a nonprofit for 6.5 years. And, if you devise a program that's working, the government should just be, giving you the resources to grow it. That would be a better approach in my mind. I just want to throw that in.
Well, can I just respond to that in one way? Because I just want to make sure my point was very clear. Government is making policy decisions all the time that don't fall into a category of something a faith-based organization would normally be asked, would not be organizing a program around, like opening up our streets and having an open streets initiative. So it is actually a two-way street, not a one-way street.
So, Pastor Mike, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Because it is now 8 o'clock. I don't know if we have time for our individual questions, or should we just go straight to closing statements?
I think I want to honor the candidate's time, and we can go into closing statements. And as you close, I would want this, because I guess you can almost answer and close at the same time. There are many people who raise critiques of both of you not having held elected office before. Why should the people of New York City trust you to lead in what may be one of the greatest crises in the recent memory, and you have not had electoral experience and experience in government, well, necessarily leading, executive level leading in this way? So we'll begin with Andrea closing statements, and at the same time addressing that.
Well, sure thing. I think Bill de Blasio had all sorts of positions before becoming mayor, and I think a lot of New Yorkers have been frustrated this last number of years. From my experience, I was the head of a small private company that became #1 in the U.S., and then I started a nonprofit. And nonprofits run on passion. They also run on money. And what I found as a head of a nonprofit is that I was never going to solve the problem I was trying to solve based upon the level of resources I was going to be able to access. And a lot of people can relate to this. I think a lot of faith leaders can relate to this. And so I looked up and I said, well, what the heck can I do to actually solve the problem I'm trying to solve? And then I found Dr. King's teachings in his 1967 book, Chaos Our Community. He said we should just have a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. I was like, well, he was right then. So how do I make that happen? There's no way to do it except run for president. And so that's when you met me, and the people watching this met me. It's when I showed up on your TV screen saying we should start giving everyone money, which was far out when I showed up on your TV screen. But now we're living a version of it with the $1,200 check, the $600 check, the $1,400 check, the child poverty tax credit. And now I want to bring that same vision and anti-poverty movement here to New York City. I want to improve our way of life dramatically. I do not want to be a mayor who comes to you and then returns to you 3.5 years later and nothing has changed. I want to deliver real change. And I'm going to suggest that if you want to see that change in Harlem and in our communities, you probably don't want someone who's been rattling around our government agencies for the last number of years. You need to take a bet on someone who's actually going to provide a real vision and leadership for a city that's in crisis. And I want to be that leader. I want to be your mayor.
Maya?
Well, thank you. And I appreciate both the opportunity to speak with all of you. And thank you for this opportunity to answer this question, because it's an important one. I have been a change maker my whole career, specifically on racial justice. and specifically around what government can and should do to make our lives better on almost every issue. But I'm also someone who was the first Black woman to be a council to New York City mayor. And who sat at the senior cabinet table and showed the city how to do things it had never done before. So I do know how city government works, but moreover, I know how to make it work in ways it hasn't. Like when I got women and minority-owned business enterprise contracts up from 500 million to 1.6 billion, matched it the second year. I did that 2 years in a row at the same time that I was laying a foundation, not just for a change in legislation in Albany to help the city do more, but also in creating the foundation for what became the Office for MWBE. We had never built the infrastructure to do it in city government, and I helped get that built while I got the contracts up. But I also actually started the first disparity study, hadn't had one in years, because we had to know how we were doing for all our communities. And that's actually what has shown us that we're not doing a good enough job either for Black women or Black people in general, Black women in particular, or Latinos. So this is the opportunity to make and do it so much better. But the other is broadband. You know, when I came in, there was no such thing as a universal broadband agency. And I had to figure out how to get universal access up. But I didn't want, as someone who's always done it around racial justice, I knew that it was our communities that are the ones that don't get the service. So what we did was I found the revenue, showed the city where and how we could take money and appropriate it differently. It's how we got every single unit in Queensbridge houses free broadband paid for by the government. And I laid out a plan to do it in public housing in every single borough. I left city government 5 years ago, but I continue to volunteer, including the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, where I confronted the NYPD and got the Daniel Pantaleo case, the officer who killed Eric Garner, over to the police department in a way that finally got him off the force. But I say this to say none of this is why I'm running. I just want to make this clear. I know how government works. I've shown how to work differently. I've shown how you can focus with a racial equity lens to get the work done. But the reason I'm running is we're at a crossroads, and we can't just have either a government that just manages the same old thing a little bit better. We have to actually be big and bold and transformational and have the courage to do things very differently and say it's every single one of our communities that will not only recover, but that will be affordable, healthy places to live with all the things that it needs. We did not talk about housing tonight, and I know that's because we didn't have time. So I do hope people will go to MayaWileyForMayor.com, because I have a housing plan that no other candidate has to subsidize rents. Not just build new affordable housing, which I will do, but to subsidize rents, because we can't just build our way out of an affordability crisis where 45% of our people can't afford the rent. So I will stop there and just say thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the patience, the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Maya. I think you were the benefactor of being the last woman standing tonight of the candidate. So thank you for going over and spending time, and I'm grateful for that. And this is going to be a challenging race, and it has been thus far. And we wanted to give people an opportunity tonight to hear in depth some of the plans and policies that you all have. So again, on behalf of myself and Dr. Greer and the FCBC community and the larger community, thank you for being part of this conversation tonight.
Thank you. And be safe and well and be blessed.
All right, take care. Well, I saw, was that water you were drinking? I saw you needed a drink.
It's water, I promise.
So what are your thoughts?
You know, running for mayor is a really hard job. And I think there have been so many forums where we're trying to cover as many issues, but I've been looking at FCBC community in the chat. And as Maya said, we didn't get to a lot of issues. We didn't talk about NYCHA. We didn't talk about prisons or jails, and sort of the jailing plan that de Blasio started and hasn't really implemented, or COVID recovery, or shelters and homelessness. So there's still a lot of issues that we need to know from candidates. And I think my takeaway is I implore everyone who's watching and listening to actually spend these next few days going to the various websites of the candidates and reading in more detail their policy papers, seeing the types of people who have endorsed them or not, and if you align with those individuals or don't, that is another context clue for yourself. Look at the work that they've done, not just what they've said. Look at sort of the actual substantive work. Can you see what they say they've done? Is it tangible, or is it just a revisionist history? And so I think for all of the candidates, not just the 5 that we saw here, the others that chose not to come for whatever reason that is, I think that we need to take this election very seriously. I know you mentioned it last night, and sadly we say this every election cycle, but this could be the most consequential election of our lives because stakes are high. We are still in the middle of a global pandemic. And if we don't get this under control, we'll be in another recession. And we know that recessions for America are depressions for Black people. And if it's a depression for America, then it's destitution for Black people.
Absolutely.
And so these are the ways that we have to think about a person that's in charge of a budget that's almost $100 billion. We have to understand what they have done. Do they deserve the job, and can they do it? And we know that it's a hard job and no one's really prepared. You don't know what it's like to walk in and be in charge of almost 9 million documented and undocumented people, 5 boroughs. We can fit massive cities within New York City. However, we have to do the due diligence so that we're prepared and really think about ranked choice voting, right? And you have the opportunity now, if you like multiple people, you can actually rank them. And, you know, a colleague of mine on Twitter said, if you're not having a fight with your family about who's on your ballot, then you need to get started, right? This is the time now that we should be at the dinner table saying, you know, why are you all on my ballot? Because we need to actually have these engagements with our family and friends about why we like certain candidates and what we're looking for in the next mayor of New York City.
Yeah, you know, somebody put their light when we do our commentary afterwards. So I appreciate that. But I think, you know,
this is the after party.
Yeah, it's the after party, right? I think that one of the things, and I'm going back to the forum tonight, you know, I can't say it while the candidates are speaking, but I noticed in the chats, people were paying attention. And this is important, and I'm actually inspired by this. I think you had persons who, one, did not answer questions, again, the second night, did not give specifics, because grand ideas and grand schemes that one may have may not get to the nuts and bolts of the crisis that we face depending on the situation. I think with regard to the segregated school question, we didn't get any real clarity as to how, one, you would really, maybe Maya came close, I think, maybe, but how would you integrate the schools, right? Desegregate the schools, integrate the schools. But here's a critical piece that you said, I don't think anyone really addressed. How do you then get those schools in communities that are functioning and operating with limited resources, the necessary resources to bring those schools in those communities up to par? That's one. Secondly, no one really addressed living wage. What is a livable wage in this city? $15 an hour is not going to cut it in New York City. Some studies show that it would take between $25 and $30 to actually survive. There are people in New York City right now who have 2 and 3 jobs and are living in homeless shelters, right? So 2 and 3 jobs and still homeless. Those are issues that many New Yorkers face in many of our communities, and they go undone. The notion about mental health, it was addressed, but I have to say this because every candidate recognizes mental health as an issue, but very little programmatic attempts or actual strategies to say, this is how we will make sure that people in underserved communities get access to mental health practitioners, right? So if you, for example, if you have these community centers that are multitasking, as one candidate suggested, that's going to be difficult. That's going to be difficult because one of the things that make it difficult in our community, you know, Dr. Greer, that there is a lot of stigma associated with mental health in our communities. And we at FCBC learned this when we had a part-time therapist in the church. There were people who were hesitant to come to the church and say they were coming to see the person for fear of the stigma. So imagine putting a mental health facility up in a center with other activities going on. You're not going to get the outcome. So I think that is critical because of the trauma we face. And as you said, the real trauma we face in communities of color in the midst of recessions, in the midst of COVID. And so here's what we know. There are a myriad of issues that are at stake. There has not been one debate that can get to all issues, and there's not one forum that can get to all the issues. And as you said, this is why it is critical, extremely critical, to make sure you do, those who are watching, the investigative work yourself. This has to be so important that you take time. Last night, Dr. Greer gave him a recommendation. If you take 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day to educate yourself, one, not just on the issues, but on these candidates, then you can begin to make some informed choices. And again, with ranked choice voting, you got a chance to lay out 5 people. 5 people, in order from 1 to 5, you can put those people who you believe best represent. And that is although there are many people who have issues and challenges with it, you get an opportunity to make your voice heard and express who you support in different ways.
And we also have to remember that no candidate is perfect.
No.
No candidate is going to satisfy 100% of what you want or need. Therefore, you have to ask yourself, what are my priorities? Yeah. What are my values? What am I looking for in a leader? Once you get your list together, you can look at the 8 or look at the 5 who bothered to come and make your choice based on that. You can then say, you know what, my biggest priority is someone who understands education, or my biggest priority is someone who's going to help decrease crime, or my biggest priority is someone who has a substantive plan to get jobs into our communities. Whatever it may be, you can then rank your value systems and your priorities for this particular election and find the candidate that meets those values for you. I think that's incredibly important. And I love the fact that your communications team has put up the findmypollsite.vote.nyc again, because if you go to that site, you can find out not just where you vote, whether you're going to vote early or on June 22nd, which is a Tuesday, polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., but you can also see your ballot. So you can see all of the names. You have an option to rank choice vote for mayor, for comptroller, for public advocate, for your city council race, for your borough president race. And if you live in Manhattan, you do not rank choice vote for Manhattan DA. That is just one vote, where you traditionally have voted in the past. But all of the other judges and city council members and the big 3, mayor, comptroller, public advocate, those are all ranked choice. So you want to see it so you can familiarize yourself with the ballot before you get into the booth. So then you have an idea of what you want to do, and that pressure and that time while you're in there doesn't take over.
I like what one of the viewers said. She said, I don't need a perfect candidate. I need a creative, compassionate, clever problem solver. That means you already know the values that you take into when it comes to making your choice and ranking your choices. You already know your values, and you let your values determine how you rank, right? And then we have people who, like one person said, they never were involved in politics until they almost died from COVID. Yeah, because elections have consequences. And even the reason we face the pandemic in dire consequences was the consequences of an election. So politics is critical to how we function in our communities. And so here, let me say this before we go, because I said at the top, 5 candidates showed up to a forum held by a church. Those candidates who came to this forum were Diane Morales, Ray McGuire, Catherine Garcia, Andrew Yang, and Maya Wiley. Those were the 5 who came. And all the candidates were given ample time to plan to make this a priority. So keep that in mind as you vote. Keep that in mind as you have conversations with your family and conversations with your networks of friends. Keep that in mind, because too often faith communities are overlooked. And as I said before, we're looked upon as validators, but not those who come to the table to talk about policy. And yet we are the ones who are doing the work on the ground, meeting the needs of communities that find themselves wrestling with many of the issues that contribute to the plight of people of color in this community. So keep that in mind. Listen, I want to say thank you, Dr. Greer, as always, for being a part of this. You have been a true friend, but more than that, you've been a friend of FCBC these past 2 days as well. Your insight and your commitment, not just to the cause of politics, but your commitment to our community is something I've always admired, and I'm truly grateful for you being willing to partner with me these past 2 nights. It has been a joy, a privilege, and a pleasure, and I just want to say thank you on behalf of FCBC.
Well, thank you, Pastor Walren. Obviously, the entire Walren family has a special place in my heart, and as does the FCBC family. I want to thank you for trusting me to ask these questions on behalf of your community. This is an incredibly important election. I know that the people who attend FCBC are incredibly savvy and passionate and intelligent when it comes to making these decisions, and I'm glad that I could serve a small role in helping them make such an important decision for June 22nd when they go to the polls. I also just encourage everyone to look at their ballot before they go and to really think about their value systems, as Pastor Mike said, so you can make the most informed decision. And don't be afraid to ask your friends what they're thinking, who they're thinking about. You might learn something new. We do have time. Don't feel overwhelmed. But there are also several other important races on the ballot that we should think about as well. So thank you for having me.
And one of those races being Manhattan DA is a critical race, and the impact that office has on our communities. Listen, early voting begins tomorrow. Primary is also June 22nd. Make sure you vote. And I got to throw this out there too, for you, Dr. Greer. FCBC is a polling site in our community. So yes, so persons in that precinct, check, find out where your polling site is, and it just may be FCBC this year. So again, thank all of you for joining tonight. I hope in some way that what you heard will help you make an informed decision. We are eternally grateful for your support, and make sure you vote, get your family to vote, because this is important. I often say, when you disengage the process, you almost forfeit your right to complain. And so make sure you are deeply engaged. So until we find these results out after this primary, much love, peace, and many blessings. Good night, everybody.